everyone, welcome to this episode of Enterprise Alchemy. As always, I'm Ant. Today, I'm joined by Tara Blythe, Chief People Officer. How are you doing?
I am doing good. How are you, Ant?
I'm very well, thanks. I'm very well. Now, what I'm interested in, we usually get straight to it, right? Without too much chit-chat. Your role, your route to the CPO, to the big chair, the C-suite chair. So you came up through a leadership, organizational development, talent management track, is that right?
That is correct, yeah.
So how does that shape what you see and the things that you think are important at the CPO level?
Yeah. So, interestingly enough, when early in my career, I used to say I was in the business of people.
Yep.
Now I say I'm in the business of business and people. Right? So those go together pretty clearly to me. From an organizational development and strategy standpoint, ultimately what that's allowed me to do to get to the seat where I am is often my peers will tell you that for years, and it's getting much, much better, but getting a seat at the executive table for a people officer where it's not placed under a chief operating officer.
Yep.
Along those lines, right? So if you put a people officer under an operating officer within an organization, you are creating people as widgets, and people are not widgets. When A happens, B doesn't happen. Their lived experiences, their beliefs, what they bring to the table, those things affect everything within an organization. And you need someone at the organization, or ideally multiple people at the organization, that are able to meet those people where they are and to see them and to pull those people into spaces, empower them, and allow them to impact pieces. So in my career, I do believe from my seat, coming in from an OD lens,
Yep.
you have a more immediate respect, because ultimately, and that maybe shouldn't be that way, but ultimately my starting place in most conversations is talking about organizational strategy.
Yeah.
And organizational strategy.
Good place to start, right?
Right? Like that's why I'm in the room. And the influence part, the people pieces, all of the other mechanisms that come out of that are so critical for the growth of an organization become the goals and the objectives that we are working towards together. But the alignment of that starting goal comes from that OD lens of what are we trying to build as an organization? Where are we in our current state? Where do we want to go? And how are we going to get there? And then it's not a hard transition for me, typically, because that's my lens, that's how I come in, to very clearly position the criticality of our talent, of our people, of human beings in getting an organization to where it needs to go. And therefore, you're in the conversation from step one. So for me, I'm able to shape from that role, that OD, I use it all the time. It also allows me to work across industries. So again, I say I'm in the business of business and people. I have worked in 5 different industries in my career. And this is where you say I look great, but I've been doing this for about 25 years now at this point, I hope. And I started in retail. I moved from retail into banking and finance. I was in home building for a little while in the United States here. I went from that into education, and from education into software as a service, into SaaS and technology industry. But in all of those roles, I served people and organizational strategy and a juxtaposition.
So there's a lot to unpack here. There's a lot of like little lines that you just kind of put in that I'm like, yeah, okay, I get exactly what you're saying, and maybe we can extrapolate on this a little bit for the audience. So, and the interesting thing lately I've found, so I've started interviewing more broad levels of the C-suite, right? So I was really COOs and CPOs, and now I've included chief financial officers, chief marketing officers, chief sales officers, talking to them and getting their perspectives. And here's kind of the interesting thing, particularly on the CFO lens. They're starting to get that actually, in order to be productive, and so, financials are lagging indicators that tells us what we've done and how much money we brought in and how much we spent and all the rest of it, what capital went where.
Yep.
You need people to give discretionary effort. You need them to be able to work together effectively. Now, go back 10 years or 20 years, the CFO conversation was very much, well, here's the numbers, and if we need to downsize, like we're just going to cut the numbers in half, get rid of half the people. HR, go do that. And they're just going to have to do more with less.
By the way,
Sorry?
you said 20 years ago, but unfortunately still often a starting point for many organizations.
Right.
But they're also the biggest weight, if you will, the biggest cost, the easiest ways to cut costs. Right.
Right. But I suppose what I was trying to be kind, Tara. So the one thing I'm seeing with this is this understanding basically that, oh yeah, people are a big lever to pull. And if we can get the people we have organizing together more effectively, and self-organizing through, empowerment. And I know you mentioned that word. And to me, that's one of those things because, and not to get too tech for a second for the listeners, but I think when people talk empowerment, oftentimes what goes into their heads in a corporate setting is more socio-structural empowerment, i.e. are we creating the conditions for empowerment versus like psychosocial empowerment? Do people feel empowered? Which is, a very different thing. And so often they can say, well, empowerment is about, I'll give this to you, rather than, is that feeling in you existing, right? But where I suppose I'm laying that as a frame to get your thoughts on this, no doubt employee experience has been a hot button issue. I've talked to many people about it, just essentially, let's just call it the war for talent or whatever, because labor markets are fairly full in employment. So, there's not a huge, if you like, amount of just unemployed people sitting there. So within that context and the employee experience, with your lens, your experience, all of this stuff, how do you see it? I know you mentioned there's kind of two pieces that you're really across or passionate about that sit underneath that. So with that frame, drop some science on me, Tara.
All right. Some science, some theory, some science, some sense of being. I think you were kind of going there with how the experience happens, that kind of psychological safety, that help with the individual within the machine, if we will. So let's go 500 feet, 500,000 feet, and let's come back down.
Beautiful.
In two different ways. So I'd like to have two conversations. You and how you framed that to me, and you said it's the war for talent. We're always in the war for something, I feel like, in my industry. Human resources, human capital management. If you go all the way back to when we called things personnel departments, I mean, it doesn't matter. We're always in the war for something, right? There's a shortage. It's the great resignation. It's the great whatever. Right now, though, if we're going to put a name on it, and I've seen a few people say things around this, I'm surprised it hasn't created a headline yet, but I think you hit it nail on the head. It's a war for productivity.
Yeah, 100%.
100%. What's up?
100%.
Right now are very, very focused on advancing pace, advancing output, keeping efficiency and effectiveness at a similar rate. In some ways, Tara, that's just basic economics. We want to control the bottom line while we rise the top line. Yeah, of course, ultimately, but we're seeing at a pace we've never seen it. So ultimately, I do want to get to that in that war for productivity in the employee experience point, but let me start with the question you ended with and then get back to that.
Sure.
Which the question you ended with was, how do we view or shape an employee experience, right? Yeah. What I think of when I go there, and I don't often jump to other people's quotes, and he is definitely overquoted, but this is definitely a Simon Sinek one. When you think, he said, leadership, what shapes things, leadership, and what it shapes an employee experience is not about, it is truly about the next great generation. It's about the generation of employees that are coming within the workforce and use that. And I don't want to make this a generation talk, because I'm sure you already got speakers on that, but I do speak on that a lot. But let's speak on it very high level in the concept of what's currently shaping our experience, right? And how do we shape that experience? I would say there's a little bit of an invisible hand here. And I am quoting you because when we prepped for this, I said something else and you went immediately to Adam Smith in 1977, and that these types of situations create themselves in it, right? But they create themselves because of the feelings, the beliefs, the thoughts of the individuals who come into an experience and their lived experiences growing up. What I think we see very uniquely across the world today is more similarity in those economically developed countries than we've ever seen before, right? More similarity in that lived experience and in those younger generations. I've been talking about generations since I got my PhD 20 years ago, or didn't finish my PhD. That was a stretch. I got an EDS, didn't do the book report, but working on my PhD 20 years ago.
Right.
When I was working on that, my work was on generations, and we've still been focused on these spaces. What's interesting is there was always, for me back then, this is based on the lived experience in the United States and cultural historical elements that have affected those generations and brought this sense of belonging and this sense of perspective to an entire generation. Now I'm seeing those trends stretch way beyond, and you and I are talking from the UK and the United States right now, but we could apply this to 30 other countries in real time and people would go, yeah, that resonates. So let me kind of rattle it off for a moment from my headspace of, we got Gen Z, we got the upcoming Gen Alpha, but Gen Z really shaping employee experiences, digital integration, right?
Yeah.
So employee experience is, they are attached and parents can be frustrated and we can look at all the science behind, is it killing brain cells and all that? And I'm a parent of 3, so trust me, I like to be in those conversations as well. But ultimately, when it comes to the world of work, and when we talk about employee experience, we're talking about seamless technology integration. Tools from a technology standpoint that hit every piece of what we do and that should be created or are creating our experiences and shaping our experiences. Of course, we'll get to AI later because of that, to keep up with their pace or to help us keep up with the pace of change and where it's going.
Yeah.
We're talking about a pandemic that shook the world and where employees felt empowered and a generation coming in because they pushed to say, hey, yeah, this whole traditional, I have to come into an office 8 to 5 every day, that doesn't work anymore. We can put that into the pairing of flexible and more remote workplaces and the trends that go around that, sure, and people can talk. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with talking about the positives or negatives and how you lose kind of finite touch and communication and all that. Ultimately, we don't get to control that. This is where we are, and it's going more that way. It's going more to this in between of when I work and how I work to get work done for the good of the business, which is more efficient when people are empowered and effective within that space and there's accountability within, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And jumps also pushed a lot by Gen Z to this idea of mental health and holistic well-being, right? That's, again, I know these are podcasts we could do on each one, but I'm just what's shaping the employee experience right now? A lot of it is employees and a very empowered generation being brave enough to say sick time isn't just when I break my leg or when I'm throwing up. It's also when I'm mentally capable to give you my best self. And what comes into that? And how do we move whole industries who feel like that's blah, blah, made up science, or you just have a headache today and you want to, or you went out last night. But truly, there is something to be said of holistic well-being and how we support that in 4 different ways. And in the HR field, there's entire pieces of our profession leaning more and more in, new companies being built around that point of the employee experience. There's continuous learning and development. There's diversity and inclusion, right? We've been talking that for a long, long time. But ultimately, it's that kind of purpose values alignment that starts and ends with that generation that I think truly then drives some of the major trends we're seeing in the employee experience today. And I would come back and say, can we shape it as HR professionals? Can we shape it as OD professionals? We can facilitate in many ways opportunities, but if you try to think that you're creating the next trend, you've lost. You just need to pay attention to what's coming and be smart enough to see it before others, and then figure out how you're adapting to meet your employees' needs because they're shaping. And the world is shaping them. And that, going back to the war for productivity, if we want to go back there next again, it's shaping. And that's shaping a lot of those trends. That competition to be successful, because ultimately the definition of business is a value return, is creating something where I get something back, right?
Yeah.
That's what's driving it.
Look, as you said, and any one of these points could be a pod in its own right.
I know.
I love thing I love about talking with you is that you take really complex concepts, right, and you pull everything together, and it's a very kind of cogent thinking. So
which is OD, right? What you started with, like why does that make me good at my job? I think that's why. That's what I do. That's what I do for a living.
right, so let me summarize to see if I understand.
Okay.
Because then if I can understand it, I think anyone can understand it, right? So basically, we've got these broad economic factors, which I think, if I'm hearing correctly, is saying, look, we need to make humans more productive because, look, we went through the Toyota, lean manufacturing and how do you minimize the amount of bolts and do all that type of stuff, right? Which is in comparison, is very obvious, And now we're saying, okay, well, a lot of that's been done. So where's the next edge? But markets, and I think a lot of this is driven potentially from the internet, right, as well, is our access to the world's information at our fingertips in pretty much any nation in the world. So then you're saying, okay, we got to make people work, and it's not about making them work harder and more hours. It's they've got to work smarter, and we got to find ways of sharpening that edge. And so it sounds like to me there's that is the corporate context of saying, well, how does our business not only survive but thrive? And that's the thing I'm hearing from CFOs and things like that. They have a slightly harder mercenary edge a lot of the time, but it's kind of, we understand the productivity issue is a big one. And then on the other side, almost generational factors. And I won't digress too much on this, but just, I suppose, just to insert a slight point there, I think as well, often when people are like bloody millennials or this or that, is like, okay, what we got to do is separate out what is stuff that are just younger people, right? Younger people act in a certain way compared to older people, and not all the same, but just, there are general trends.
Their lived experiences, how they view the world, what's been reinforced within them, and what they're trying to accomplish. They're going to act in those systems to some extent, but they're going to shape the systems as well.
Right. And so the way, I suppose, what I'm understanding is there are certain mega trends, societal mega trends that come over the top that say this is something that touches everybody, in that generation, and shapes their kind of the way they interact with the world. And so there's sort of an expectation driven by labor market conditions and pandemics and all sorts of stuff. So on one side, we got the productivity. On the other side, people saying, cool, I get it, but you have to listen to me, right? You have to value me, see me as a human being. And, that starts with listening to how I can be the most productive version of myself, whether that's, working in the office, working from home, whether that's I start later and work later, whatever it is. It's a fundamental shift from what was really traditionally a much more command and control structure, if you look at it, essentially, to a decentralized, individual empowered and team empowered environment. So is that kind of roughly on the mark?
Yeah. So let me reflect. Yes. And let me reflect on that. So, I started with, I'm in the business of business and I'm in the business of people.
Yeah.
One of the first comments you made, I would ask you to just do I will do a mirror moment for you, which is what I do, right? Executive coaching. A mirror moment for how you said that. I would say we don't, and I think we are missing the market. We're trying to make workplaces more productive. We're not necessarily trying to make people more productive.
Yeah.
Find a way to be more productive if we give them the tools, the support, the facilitation, and the end result we're marching towards together. You will see that happen. And where I think we need to be careful is that often people focus too much on the people. And then we get two categorizations of, is this person performing at a certain rate and there's something wrong with them or their space, without backing up and saying, what are we doing within our organizations? Don't get me wrong. There are different levels of competency, skill sets, knowledge, and ability that are a match for a role that can be expanded. And there are individuals that are better fits that need investment. And that type of work is also critically important, looking at individuals from the individual lens. But if we start at the business frame, we start at that from a more productivity standpoint, what we need to do is step back and look, economic trend aside, here's what we're seeing. It's already happening. And people that go, oh, this is just starting, this is the most time, it's the time we've seen the most pressure for it.
Mm-hmm.
It's the time where it seemed like a fostering space, and we've had this big rubber band effect of resignation and then hiring and then not hiring again in some of our most productive and economic development. So we're seeing that kind of reaction. But ultimately, if we look across the trend over the last 50, 60 years, you see a number that to me is the most telling that this has been happening for a minute. And that is the average size of the workforce has gone up a few percentages a year since 1960. In that same time, our gross domestic product in the United States, and pretty much any truly economic, like same, so UK is the same, it's not going to be too far behind it, has gone up like 600%. Simply, that means less people are producing more things.
Yeah.
Gross domestic product used to be, for an HR person, one of the measures we could say that if we're producing more, we need more people to produce it. It's a one-to-one relationship. That is not necessarily the case. So to your point, I do think we tend to go think smarter. I don't hate that term. That's been around for a little while. We need to think smarter. I would say, though, it's what tends to be something that makes people like kind of cringe. And it's a human feeling when managers start saying we need to be doing more with less. I hate that term,
Which
right?
basically means I'm firing half of you. So
Work harder, pay just the same. That's not me, right? That's not what we're saying. It's actually we need to be doing less and producing more. And by the way, the world has caught up with us and or actually now is leading us to give us tools that allow us to do exactly that. And that is what's driving that. Now, that and the fact that, we have all these things we've seen on the business side. So let me just stay on the business side for just a second.
Sure.
Over talked about, but people talk about it all the time. We know, Harvard Business Review says, Forbes says, there's probably 35 articles with 4 different statistics in the last 15 years that basically says businesses need to transform at an exponential rate to continue to keep pace. The workplace itself, the organizational structure, the strategy itself, because the competitive market is coming at such a pace. If we then step back and go, but the core of a business are human beings, and that will not ever be replaced, right? We as people are the core of the business. We need to be ready and agile to transform at a whole new pace. So truly, what's shaping the employee experience at this point is a level of critical thinking at pace, is what I like to call it, paired with, yes, resilience, which was completely over talked about after the pandemic, but does make some sense.
Yeah.
It is kind of, and I'm of the opinion that resilience, if it's used as a rubber band, is this idea that we can keep stretching and never need to have it. You can break. It's just your ability to get back up after you broke. And build and learn from them.
And also, just on that point, Tara, I find it kind of funny because I saw this a lot, like law firms, for example, were a big one on this. Oh, we need resilience training. And I'm like, okay, is this just code for we want people to work more hours without complaining about it and breaking down? So it's like basically just whipping the mule.
They're all for more vacation. They're talking about mental health sick days when I think they really just have a headache. It's like, no, actually, it can be code. But what we're actually saying is that we're equipping human beings where we can so that we can eventually stay out of their way. They'll find a way. They'll find a way, right? So give them an opportunity, help them understand what we're trying to accomplish together and their incredible impact in them, and then get out of the way. That is, yes, in some ways, the most resilient people tend to look and come into that situation and not see a wall with no door, but figure out a way around it. That's resilience training, right? It's more actually critical thinking at pace. It's when I hit something that in the past told me I needed to stop, command and control, the comment you made earlier, and wait to be directed. Or I hit a wall that I don't have the simple answer right in front of me. There's not a door that I'm used to seeing with a handle that says that that's the way out. How do I get out of that room and get to my next space? Resilience truly is, I'm not going to give up in the face of that obstacle.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, perseverance. So I'm going to go a little bit very super high level here. So bear with me if
Come on,
you're
I'm
like,
going to go there with you.
if you're like, dude, you're just off the wall. That's fine. So this is what I wonder, right? Like, first of all, obviously the pace of innovation and change is getting quicker. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, and you know, the evidence, I mean, look at what's happened in the last 20 years versus the last 100 versus the 100 before that.
Right.
Right. So you would say, well, there is evidence in front of your eyes that the pace of change is picking up. There's too much information out there, right? Too many decisions to be made, such that a centralized structure with centralized decision making, and I'm not saying in all cases, and I'm not saying tomorrow, but to me, the trend looks like you're not going to be able to survive as an organization if that's how you do things, because it's just too slow. And there's a speed issue, but also there's an issue of it's just too much. So it's a difficulty, because if it's all centralized through a couple of hands, you know, at C-suite level or near the C-suite level, then it's okay, well, I can't process all this information, so I've got to dump a lot of it. And some of it may not be relevant at scale at the organizational level, but may be very relevant to the team. So this, I suppose, is to your point of really, then it sounds like equipping the team with the mindset, the tools, the guidance to say, yeah, sure, there are some things, don't go changing, because we do have economies of scale, and that is something that has been proven. If, you know, economies of scale works to some extent to enhance productivity, hence the GDP increase, right?
Yep.
But in an increasingly complex world, that alone, I don't think is going to work. So that's my first part is I'll get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Okay. So first, you just made a comment here, and it was Maurice Conti. He's a futurist, but he said 7 years ago that the world's going to change more the next 25 years than it has in the last 2000. And he's proven to be right. Most futurists are the way, all they usually do. But I do love the definition of a futurist. Usually they look into the future and they make a prediction that proves to be right. That is truly what they do.
I've always thought, what a cool job would that be, eh?
I know. I was like, get that title.
I know, right? You go, listen, I'm going to cost $1 million a year, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you about I'm like Nostradamus on steroids. you pay me that $1 million, and I'll sit and come up with these pearls of wisdom.
And honestly, you just need to have a couple that actually pay somebody else $1 million, and they'll pay you $1 million for it, right? That's how that is. Okay, so but then, so the pace of change is changing that. We do understand, and I loved how you just phrased that, and but from a human being, so let's center back on people, away from the business. The workforces need to move faster. The organizations need to reinvent themselves. They need to run at a pace to stay competitive in a structure, or they will cease to exist. And that does go across industry, and that does go on scale, yes, driven from our biggest organizations, and that's why you see such bigger organizations continuing to do acquisitions and moving and capturing market space in a different way than we've ever seen before, which tends to lead to more mergers and acquisitions versus what we've seen in the past, because it's hard to compete at a similar pace when you have a head start and you have a larger piece. The problem is those bigger ones also, though, they do, but once they get too big, they're not as agile.
Yeah.
So what the other organizations are forgetting is that they do have an inherent advantage with staying at a certain scale with what's coming at us. Additionally, the other thing those smaller organizations have, and I promise I'm going to get back to people, which is what we're talking about here in a minute and how it's affecting them. But at the organizational level, if we start there, those organizations that can be more agile because they're smaller, because they haven't gotten to these big mammoths where we need to move the whole Titanic, we can move the speedboat, right? Those organizations also have the potential to expand their competitive space and focus on things in a way. You said too much stuff, too fast. Big organizations have to play in the world of too much stuff. They're that big. They're enterprise. There's a reason it's enterprise like software, enterprise knowledge. It does all the things. If we're trying to do all the things, can you do anything specifically well? where we're seeing some of our best organizations be more niche, be more specific on a very specific thing. Now, granted, somebody would come back at me and rightfully and so on go, but yeah, a lot of those go on that niche with the ultimate plan of getting the big mammoth to buy them so they have their retirement plan. Fair. But that isn't wrong. It is a part of how business works, and it's working right. So now let's apply that back to the human component, right? So like the same way, I agree with you, and I love that piece. Is we find if we don't pause and help people come, one of the biggest things we're seeing right now with the trends coming into the marketplace is fear of being obsolete, fear of not being at my skills, my knowledge, my abilities no longer being credible, of robots or the Terminator eventually doing my job for me, because we're misviewing what could actually help us get there. And it is, you are absolutely right. It is more than we've ever thrown at people all at once at a faster pace. That is absolutely true. However, if everyone would center themselves for a moment and breathe, you would see we have more tools specifically already built to help you be good at exactly that than we've ever had in our history. And by the way, if we go back to that youngest generation, what are they best at? What are they best at better than anything is what we can say, oh, well, this is a problem because they were told they could be gymnastics champion and soccer and this all at once. And they could do this, and this, and they can. And yes, we can say they have an 8-second filter and they move on too fast and they can't focus on something. But you know what they can do very quickly is hear you out of the left side of your arm while they're still focusing on something else and function and think at a pace because they've been brought up to do so that no other generation has been able to do. And if we look at that as their strength instead of something what their weaknesses are, which they have some, and by the way, our generations did too.
Yeah, everybody does,
we can find ways that we collaborate together to achieve the goal, right? That is what we can create and build together. So I am going to use an analogy here. I usually use it to talk about AI, but I think it works in your organization, John, because I do think that this is how I get people to just think about where AI is currently. And it is advancing very, very quickly. But currently, it is not in your way unless you make it in your way. It shouldn't be scary unless you choose to ignore it and you put your head in the sand. What it is a tool to make this easier on you. So I say it's very much like the people mover in the airport right now, right? So first of all, you got to think design thinking, got to think context within space. A people mover, specifically in an airport, is an incredible tool. The point of an airport, yes, some people have more time and they want to make it their own vacation and they want to visit every store. And yes, people try to capitalize on that. But ultimately, you're trying to get from one terminal to another to not miss a plane, to eventually get to a different destination. You have an output that is not there. It is a space in between. And your job is ideally, if you wanted to be more efficient and more effective, if you chose to use the people mover to stand on that, you put in less effort and you get to the same place as someone who is putting in more effort that doesn't choose that.
Right.
Why I like that, right? So let's go back to your analogy. If we throw in too much at people, a people mover in an airport, if you're paying attention, open your eyes a little bit, you go, there's a path right in front of me that I can take that makes this simpler to get to my destination.
Right.
I can choose to use it or not. And then if I get on that path, I put in less effort and I get to the same place. If you use it right. Now, so don't get me started. There's people that stand on that thing. That's not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to walk on it. You're still walking at the same pace you would have if you weren't on it, but you get to your destination faster. And that is a lot of the tools that we're creating, especially AI right now. It allows you to think at a pace. It allows you to start running when maybe your body can only walk, right? And that is what we're talking, and that is what the world is requiring. That is what workplaces need to do. But employees shouldn't be afraid of that. They should be looking at, okay, when I apply my world, how does it affect me? How do I utilize that to get to a next step? And for a lot of people, one of the things that I think it would say is it takes a very, very, very special skill. It is probably the most unique skill in human world to be a creator.
Yeah.
It's something that very stark. I'd never say stop away from that. People could do that, but it's harder.
Yeah.
It takes work to step back and create something from scratch that never existed before, right? And then ultimately, there's going to be many things you can find out there that is anything ever not existed for. Everything that we even give people credit for as being these amazing ideas were iterated by other ideas.
Right. You stand on the shoulders of giants.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So what is AI really doing right now for a lot of people in professional careers defined as ones that I went and already got a degree for this job, and I supposedly qualified in this way to apply this, and I have a group of knowledge that I'm applying to this job, is it allows you to prompt and work with something to say, this is what I think I want to say in these spaces, but I want to pull in this type of information and this type of information. And it gives you a start. Is it perfect? It's not perfect, but it allows you to edit. It allows you to stand on the shoulders of giant quicker. It allows you to go, that's close, but I actually wanted to say this. And it saves so much time in that output that used to be pushed in different ways. And so then I'll just finish this conversation because I almost always get the question when I go too far here of, but what about those jobs whose job it was just to get that information, just to pull that piece, where that was a whole profession before? Agreed. I understand. There are some of those things that will go away, but it will make more jobs. It will absolutely create, one of the statistics I saw, 5 times the new jobs that it does away with the current jobs.
Yeah.
And so what that should mean for current employees is, as long as you don't stick your head in the sand and you pay attention and you start to look at where that next is, you will not become obsolete.
Yeah.
You need to adapt with it. And so then resilience, adaptability, critical thinking at pace becomes the skills of the people.
Wow. Okay. That's you've given me some interesting things to process there. And I think for the audience as well. I myself am a proponent of AI. I use it, and I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding, a fear. And to your point, I think the real thing that it does is, whether you're running an AI algorithm on your own data set or the internet, like via ChatGPT or some combination, it's a fundamentally better way to organize the data and the information and get usable information out of it quickly. And the way that the algorithms work, I think I've found, certainly, this is not something, if you go back before those sort of machine learning type algorithms, right, or the large language models specifically, the amount of stuff you'd need to store in a database, right, to get those kind of insights, because it'd all need to be structured. And you say, look this up, and it's a fun, to me, this is as big as the advent of the internet. And it's, okay, this is the next wave. And it's not something to be feared. In fact, it just makes things easier. Like, if you ever just go and ask something of Google and then go and ask it of ChatGPT. And it's like, okay, that's so much more usable, and I can give much clearer parameters as to the context that I want to use this within. And bam, there's the information. And I think you mentioned this to me, and I know you had mentioned it just before, but when we first spoke, like you said, creativity is hard. It's time consuming. Editing is much easier.
Yeah.
And I've been using it myself, right, for some stuff where I'm like, I think I want to write this. Okay, punch it into ChatGPT. And then I'll get, it varies depending on the topic and how much information there is on the net out there about a specific thing. But let's say it's between 80 and 95% of what I want. And then all I need to do is so therefore the 80% of the work that was the hard bit of really just starting it is like, well, that's done for you in 2 seconds.
Right. The hard bit or the time consuming bit. And
Right.
so for active productivity, the time saving alone for a similar output, and we have the tools. It's coming, and they're advancing, and they will continue to advance as we human beings say, this is great, but I wish it did this. Well, great, make it do that.
Yeah, right. Yeah. That's the thing, is there's so much flexibility in it, which is amazing. So I'm going to ask you one philosophical question, and then one kind of career question, if I can, right?
Okay.
Or reflective question, just to kind of close out the episode. So something I've been thinking about, and maybe it's because I'm like, I had one too many beers or something and started to go down this rabbit hole, right? But I'm like, people talk about change, right? And it's an A to B thing, right? And they're talking about the advent of AI, but then there was the advent of the internet, and
Yeah.
before that, the advent of the computer, and before so on and so on and so on. The motor car, these game-changing kind of innovations. Do you think all of this is just maybe it's just a symptom of biology? Like, we're programmed to evolve. It's evolution. And so that's why things, because you see like the entropy, right? And they say, well, everything tends from disorder to order. And then, like, so for example, you leave a building in the sand and it just eventually it just returns to the sand. It all breaks down. And so humans, and everything really in life, right? We're preconditioned to evolve, so that these things, this productivity, all the other stuff is actually inevitable because it's part of the human condition.
Okay. So,
sorry, I've gone completely off the business thing there, but I was just.
I mean, yes, if you take it, if you take it down to its lowest level, we are programmed to survive.
Yeah.
Right. And programmed, I'm going to have a little bit of that word itself. I'm going, what makes human beings unique is they are programmed. They're not a machine. And that is where the machines won't change, right?
No.
Even though they can sure look like us now. That's what really scares people is, and this is an example, these big changes where people are like, it's that big. It's been coming for a while if you were paying attention. AI has been around since 1960, since the original chatbots. We just now have an algorithm that mimics human behavior in a way that we go, wait, that I don't know, I could have told a computer said that versus a person. Where 3 years ago, people felt pretty strongly they could have. Their human cognition would have said, that is not a chatbot talking to me. That's a machine talking to me, not a human. And I want a human. I want somebody who understands and can adapt with me. And now there's an algorithm that works at a pace and learns at a pace and has a tone of voice and that can talk to you in a way that appeals, right? But ultimately, to your question on basic biology, we're programmed, or we live to survive. We figure out our lived environments, our worked environments. We can take that to the biggest scale of the world. We will figure out a way to survive. Surviving in the context of what the world creates. Do I think that it's somewhat inevitable that adaptation continues to happen? I'm not going to start going to evolution here, but just like biology and other things adapt, you will see push. Sometimes the world follows sci-fi, right? I saw an article yesterday where people are trying to find a multi-universe, and I went, oh, really? But some years ago, somebody talked about AI as that kind of crazy. So ultimately, do I think it's inevitable that in our world to survive, as the context around us creates new environments, we will find a way to evolve too? Yes, I do. And I have a lot of faith in human beings to be able to do that. Now, is it also worth the value of listening to a podcast like this or having a conversation to talk about, okay, where's the right mindset for me if I'm coming in and I'm feeling a fear, or I'm feeling a concern, or I'm trusted with a role like I have in an organization, and my job is to help people experience this in a way and to see that they are actually enabled, empowered, and can move through it. How do I create said environments or tools or offer those spaces? Then we are really going to say, pause and go. Lean into the understanding that you can touch and influence behavior, but you can also need to let them come to their own conclusions based on the tools and things that they can work with to see together. And if you start pointing out things that you hand them, that's the way I answer that right now, is, well, how do you get people to embrace NI? It's like you start showing them in the tools they already have, which, by the way, you don't have to do much there either. The tools are smart enough to know if they want to continue to survive, they better put it in there. So I don't know if this was purposeful, but the button, at least in the United States, is looks like a magical sparkle whenever there's AI, which I think is hilarious. It's, to your point, humans are going to call it magic until it's science.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And so for us, AI right now is still magic. So it's a magical sparkle in the technology we trust. There's a new widget jumping up that we can click, and it usually has an AI component. But for any employers out there that are saying AI or any of these trends, honest, that are affecting the workforce, the best thing you can do is show them where they're already embracing it so that it doesn't feel that scary. It's the fear of the unknown that scares people, but when they feel that they're a part of it, so let's just go back to typical change management.
Yeah.
You feel like you got on the roller coaster because you wanted the thrill. You chose to be on that versus being strapped in with against your will. It's a very different feeling.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, I love talking to you. Such a deep thinker. God, you just traverse so many things so easily. It's awesome. Right.
We'll meet one day, right? You're either gonna come over here or I'm gonna come back to the UK. Or we'll meet in person.
Yeah, for sure. I'd love to. There's so much stuff. This is the thing. Off camera, we could probably sit down over a beer and talk for like 3 or 4 hours, and then be like, "Oh my God, my brain is burned out." So let me ask you one final question, Tara. Looking at it now, and I you've been in work a while, like I have. What's one piece of advice you'd give to the younger Tara?
I've done a little confidence building over the last 3 to 5 years, 3 to 5 years for myself. In that, I've always had a healthy understanding of my skill sets.
Right.
Early on in my career, what I understood to be my innate abilities to quickly understand a larger dynamic and how people influence or see it, and to therefore influence the outcome through people, felt to me as manipulative with what I was best at.
Right.
And I shied away from embracing that strength for the positive it could have. I have a couple colleagues who gives it some names now, but the one I like best is tactical influencing. But ultimately, I think that if I give myself a little bit of a talking to, and I think this applies to anybody, is human beings are not, they're not, they're every single person has a unique lived experience, sense of being, perspective on the world, group of knowledge, skills, and abilities. Find that thing that makes you so special and don't shy away from it because the world might give it a title or a term or that doesn't feel positive to you. Figure out how you harness that to make positive change. And for me, I have turned that into a career, right? So going back to your very first question, why I think organizational development is the right fit for me is I can come into most rooms and without any experience and understanding of necessarily past, I can hear and understand the pieces in the room and repeat it in a way maybe somebody else couldn't hear it a moment ago, because I tune in on how people both receive and give information. And I can be that interpreter. And perhaps then Tara was an early chat AI. And if I'm not scared of chat AI because it does my skill better than me, then you shouldn't be either.
Cool. Well, Tara, it's been an absolutely illuminating conversation. Thank you very much for taking the time and, opening up and giving us all your thoughts and engaging in some stimulating conversation. Thank you very much, Tara.
Thank you, Anthony. I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. All right, everyone. That brings us to the end of this episode of Enterprise Alchemy. As always, I'm Ant, and I'll see you on the next one.